intelligence of Google and the transparency of GNU Linux. The analytical methods used by the collecting society could be invasive. Instead of using statistical methods to figure out who was listening to what and who to pay, they could spy on all of our network traffic to figure out what we were doing. But these are implementation details. They're not deal breakers. Advocating blanket licenses for online music for downloading would be a huge win for pirates and for copyright reformers in general. But to understand why, first we need to ask ourselves what copyright is for. Now, I'm of the opinion that copyright can be good and that we can have a good copyright system provided that it is confined to merely regulating the entertainment industry. After all, there's nothing wrong with the idea that industries should be regulated. We like the idea that we could have regulations that protect the public, like regulations against unfair lending practices in banks. We like the idea that we could have regulations that protect members of the supply chain from abuse through the natural choke points. Now, many European nations have had this technical idea that the purpose of copyright was to regulate culture and to protect artists. But if you look at the history of copyright, it has always been written with the entertainment industry's supply chain in mind, and has always been run that way. The problem is that it's metastasized. We used to have this test to determine whether or not you were in the entertainment industry, and it was whether you were making a copy. Because people who made copies in the old days had record presses, or printing presses, or film labs. Today, we copy a million times before breakfast. We copy like we brush our teeth. Now, that doesn't mean that we're all suddenly a part of the entertainment industry. It means the entertainment industry needs to start cabining in more closely who falls under its regulation. Now, if you were playing Sim Regulator and you wanted to establish a good copyright system, one that made all of your Sims very happy, how would you measure whether or not you were successful? I don't think you could do it by measuring the total amount of money that was earned under your system. After all, if I had a movie regulation system that produced a single movie every year that made me $1 trillion and prohibited everyone else from making any movies at all, I think we'd probably call it a failure. I think a successful copyright system is one that allows the widest diversity of creators to make the widest diversity of works that's enjoyed by the widest diversity of audiences. In other words, if you and I were playing a Sim Regulator tournament, and in your sim, your rule produced X works by Y artists enjoyed by Z people, and mine produced X plus 1 works produced by X plus 1 artists enjoyed by Z plus 1 people, then I would win the tournament. But copyright is also a monopoly on copying, performance, and distribution. And like every monopoly, copyright warps the minds of people who enjoy it. They see themselves not as participants in an ecosystem, but as its natural lords. Like everyone who finds himself at the top of a social order, entertainment executives conclude that the social order is a fair meritocracy and that they are at its peak because they're the best people in the universe. This kind of ugly reasoning leads people who embrace it to conclude that even if they suppress or oppress or rip off artists, they're still serving art, since a good copyright system is one that rewards the best people, and they are the best people. Therefore, copyright is doing its job. If we're going to win the regulatory, legal, and political battles on the issue of copyright, we need to smoke out the entertainment industry on this. We need to show that what they're in the business of is protecting their own interests, not culture, not creativity, and not the wider interests that are meant to be served through their regulation. Because the purpose of all the litigation, lobbying, and laws that the entertainment industry creates is not to reduce the amount of copying on the internet. The entertainment industry knows very well that DRM won't stop copying. They know that you can't operate a service like YouTube and prevent copyright infringement. After all, YouTube gets an hour of video every second. If every copyright lawyer that ever lived did nothing but review YouTube videos for 16 hours a day, they'd never make a dent in it. We'd run out of copyright lawyers before we hit the heat death of the universe. So Why does the industry continue to embrace DRM? Why is Viacom suing YouTube? Well, start with DRM. DRM isn't technically challenging to break. You just can't hide a secret in user equipment and expect that no user anywhere will figure out how to extract it. And certainly, it's not hard for manufacturers to figure out how to beat DRM. Just look at all those region-free players from everyone from no-name companies all the way up to Sony. But it's against the law to break DRM, even if you're not violating copyright law, which means that when manufacturers produce commercial products that have features that DRM prevents, you're breaking the law. So imagine that we were back in 1996, and you went into a record store, and you bought €1,000 worth of DVDs and €1,000 worth of CDs. DVDs were just introduced. You put them all in a vault, in a safe. And you waited 15 years, and you went and you retrieved them. In the 15 years, your CDs will have accumulated in value, because even though we don't use CDs very much anymore, you could rip them. And having ripped them, you can make them into ringtones and alarm tones. You could stream them, back them up, mash them up, upload them, do all of those things that we do, realize all of that new value from your CDs. But DVDs, because they have DRM, it's illegal for anyone to make a product that allows you to do anything with them that the studios don't like. And so in 15 years, your DVDs have accumulated no new value. They can do exactly what they could do in 1996. Time stands still for DRM. Now, back when I worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I attended a lot of DRM standards body meetings, including the DVB standardization for European TV DRM. And the motion picture industry representatives proposed all kinds of insane flags for their DRM. And one of them that was really weird, they had a flag called Do Not Retransmit. And when it was set on a program, you couldn't watch that program in a room other than the one it was being received on. You couldn't have a receiver in your sitting room and then a wireless retransmitter up into the bedroom so you could watch in a set upstairs. And when I asked the person from the MPA, why is that flag there? What theory of copyright makes you think that a rights holder gets to tell you what room you can watch TV in? He said, look, watching a show in one room that's being received in another room has value. And if it has value, we need to be able to charge money for it. Now, I call this the urinary tract infection business model. With analog media and digital media that doesn't have DRM, all of the value flows in a kind of healthy gush. But once you add DRM to it, every new feature comes in a painful drip. Every button on your remote has a price tag associated with it. The industry's focus is not on preventing piracy. It's on controlling competition. The copyright wars are not an existential struggle for the entertainment industry. They are a profit maximization strategy. The goal is to ensure that new products are only introduced after they have been vetted to ensure that they don't disrupt the natural order of the marketplace, the order that has them at the top. Now back to blanket licenses. A world in which we had fairly administered blanket licenses for downloading would allow users to keep all the value that came with their music, to buy, make, sell, or give away new technologies that add value to music, even if that new value forecloses on some totally speculative new business model for the entertainment industry. It would also allow new entrants to the marketplace. An indie artist would have the same crack at the pool of funds being collected as the artists who've been made to sell their souls to the labels. And the labels would hate it. But every time they spoke out against blanket licenses, we could point to all those other blanket licenses, the ones that they control, and we could say how, and then the ones that they figured out how to fiddle. And we could ask whether those licenses should be abolished too. If we get blanket licenses, there would suddenly be no music-related reason to censor or surveil the internet. And it would set a precedent. Anytime some other group of rights holders showed up and said, we need to censor, we need to surveil, we need to break the internet in order to protect our business, they would face the specter that someone would say, why don't we just make your stuff available on a blanket license too? €3 for internet service with all the music, €5 for the internet service with all the music and all the movies. This puts pirates and other copyright reformers in the position of demanding more money for artists, and labels and big content in the position against advocating for the only proven solution and in favor of speculative revenue maximization strategies that revolve around the idea that there's gold in selling the right to watch a movie on Wednesdays while standing on one foot between the hours of 10:14 and 11:27 p.m. Now, this could be a winning strategy for pirates. At every turn, we can advocate for fair, internet-native solutions to solve the problem of creators, audiences, and technologists. For example, think of popular music sharing. Think of music sampling. Incorporating snatches of one song into another is a long and integral part of all music performance. It's the basis for styles like calypso, and it's been widely practiced in popular music, from legendary jazz solos that grab a few bars of another performer's song and riff on them to the excerpt from La Marseillaise that opens the Beatles' All You Need Is Love. It's a feature in classical music, of course, where themes from one composer find their way into other composers' works. And it's a feature in many live performances. An example that's sort of regionally appropriate was in Prešov in Slovakia. There was a performer named Lukáš Kmitu, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, who in 2011 was performing on the violin when someone's Nokia phone started to ring. And as the audience fell silent and the violin stopped, everyone turned to look at the man whose phone was ringing. But then they turned back to look at the violinist because he began to improvise a 5-minute virtuoso performance based on that hated, much-played ringtone. Analog sampling is legal. Copyright systems always recognized it as seemly, proper, and legitimate for a few notes from one song to find their way into another. When the first digital samples were incorporated into hip-hop, no one worried about copyright. If anyone gave it a thought, they probably assumed that digital samples had the same legal status as analog ones. Is it really so different to recreate a few snatches of someone else's music with a sampler instead of a guitar? What followed was the flowering of a new genre, one that had widespread commercial, critical, and cultural and popular success. Albums like Public Enemy's 1990 It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, and the Beastie Boys' 1989's Paul's Boutique netted millions and changed the face of music. They used hundreds of samples each and didn't get permission for any of them. They invented new musical techniques like layering several drum beats on top of one to make a hyperbeat. But since then, the screws have tightened. A combination of legislation and precedent has established an ironclad industry practice of clearing every sample. As Kember MacLeod and Peter DeCola showed in Creative License, none of the classical hip-hop albums could be made today. Paul's Boutique, one of the most commercially successful records of all time, would lose nearly $20 million if it were made today. Most legal hip-hop songs today contain only one sample or perhaps two. Anything more would be too expensive. An entire genre of music, the sort that uses more than 2 samples per song, has no legal existence. It can be heard, but anyone who creates it is liable to legal punishment and can't make any money from it. There's a genre's worth of musicians who either don't create or, if they do create, can't get paid. That can't be what copyright's for. Now, there's a large pool of music that can be sampled without permission. That's the public domain music. But of course, the extension of copyright terms means that almost anything you've heard of now belongs to one of 4 labels, and the labels won't license to you, generally speaking, unless you're already signed to a label. So this creates the terrible situation in which, in order to make sample-based music, you must first sign with a label and take the crappy contract they offer you. Now, there's some evidence that requiring licenses for digital samples did something good. They provided a small but important income stream to an earlier generation of artists, mostly African-American artists, who got screwed 3 ways. First, because the rules were written with corporations and not artists in mind. And second, because the corporations cheated. And third, because justice has never been widely available to people of African-American descent in the United States. If licensing sampling turns out to be the least worst way to address that old wrong, then copyright could create a streamlined system of licenses that